Kia ora and welcome to this edition of Tower Sector Report. Well, with the 43rd Fieldays just finished with 117,000 people through the gates over the 4 days, we decided to take a look at an event which began in 1969 with an attendance of just 15,000. Tower Sector Report correspondent Drew Chappell has a field report in which he looks at the way this huge event, the biggest of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere, has developed over the decades. And it's a fascinating history. But first up in the programme, an exclusive interview with Prime Minister John Key. He spared us some time at Fieldays and came along to our studio. The Prime Minister made it abundantly clear that without virtually every primary sector experiencing boom times, this country would indeed be in dire straits. And I'll also be talking to the CEO of AgResearch, Dr. Tom Richardson, who took over 9 months ago. But first up, Prime Minister John Key. And if you hear a bit of background noise, that's from Fieldays visitors who crowded around our studio to hear what the PM had to say. Well, Prime Minister, welcome to the Tower Sector Report programme here on Country 99 TV. I think we talked a couple of years ago, so it's nice to have you back again.
Great to be back.
Great. Now, let's just take a look at the economy in general and then move on to the rural sector.
Yeah.
What state are we really in? I mean, with our huge debts, are we lurking close to the pigs, the Portugals, Irelands, Icelands, Greece?
Look, I think we're in a lot better shape, and we're in a lot better shape certainly post the budget. If you have a think about the position we're in, we've got a large deficit this year, 16.7 billion, but a big chunk of that is Christchurch. And if you think about what we're doing in terms of reining in expenditure and the changes we've made post the budget, we are going to halve the deficit next year, halve it the year after that, and by then we'll be back in surplus. Now, if you think about that position, only 3 countries in the developed world, ourselves, Australia and Korea, will be back in surplus by 2013-14. Even the Reserve Bank have just said, as they assessed interest rates last week, that New Zealand's likely to grow both in the first and second quarter modestly this year, but when you consider the enormous impact on Christchurch, to be positive is great. And then they're predicting growth next year to be 5% in real terms. So if you add inflation to that, in nominal terms, you're talking about growth of about 8%. So we are in very strong shape. There's a lot of work to be done. We're only partway through the job, but we are now starting to really grow jobs and invigorate our economy.
Yeah, I mean, I know generally you are a pretty sunny optimist.
I am.
But with all we've got on our plate, you still wonder though. I mean, government borrowings, I think I'm right, around $300 million a week, a massive clean-up bill in Christchurch, bailouts and the possibility of another one with AMI, the wash-up costs of Pike River, they all add up. So you've got that government debt, which is a problem, but also what about our private debt?
Yeah, so it's worth sort of thinking about each of those individual things. There's no question the government's inherited what is a difficult situation for any government to inherit. Global financial crisis, 2 earthquakes in Christchurch, Pike River disaster, failed finance company. So, yeah, we would say, look, haven't had the easiest of runs as a government. No. On the other side of the coin, that $300 million a week, as of July 1, borrowings go down to $100 million a week. We're going to have debt topping out at under 30% of GDP. When we came in, the expectations would be by 2017 it would be about 60% of GDP. Right. So we're actually getting on top of that. You are right to identify the private sector debt as being an issue. The other one point I would make also about Christchurch is the budget was about 2 things: paying for Christchurch, and we fully do that in budget 2011. The second thing was ultimately about getting ourselves back into surplus. Now, if you think about private sector debt, yes, that's a different issue. Mum and Dad are starting to save more, that's good, but we really need to change the culture in New Zealand to be one of savings, exports and investment away from consumption that we saw in the 2000s.
What about the rural sector? What's the feedback you're getting on the health of the backbone of our economy?
That's the shining star, and there's a lot of reasons for that. For a start, we've got very high commodity prices, so you have to really go back probably to the 1960s to see across the board high commodity prices. It's not just dairy, it's sheep and it's beef and it's wool and ultimately aquaculture, forestry, you name it.
Yeah, it's hard to find an exception really.
Absolutely.
Maybe wine.
I've been wandering around the Fieldays and sheep farmers are making money and they haven't done that for a long period of time. Now, why is that? It's the big demand out of Asia that I've been talking about for a long period of time. And yeah, okay, I am a sort of optimistic person, but if you just look at the fundamentals, they're very strong in Asia. And it's not just China. A lot of a lot of exposure, a lot of emphasis is put on China. But India, we're going there in a couple of weeks to try and negotiate a free trade agreement. Second most populated country in the world. You're seeing huge demand.
Not an easy
for our
place
products.
to do business in, mind you.
No, and that's the purpose of the free trade agreement, is to try and make life easier there. So, look, you're always going to get fluctuations with exchange rates or commodity prices, and ultimately from time to time demand. But the long-term demand picture out of Asia is phenomenal in my view.
Now, farmers don't like the idea of an ETS.
They don't.
Probably a few of them have been in your ear here at Fieldays today. So does the ETS present some political risk for you in rural New Zealand?
Yeah, I think it's the other way around actually. Now that Labor have come out and said they're going to bring farming into the ETS in 2013, we've said categorically we won't. We've also said, look, we have agriculture due to come in 2015, but we're in the process of undertaking a review. And what I've said to farmers is, look, I'm not going to bring you into the ETS unless we start seeing movement from our trading partners in this space. So from our point of view, I mean, farmers are paying a bit for the ETS at the moment through diesel, petrol and electricity prices. Actually, the small price changes, but they are changing behaviour, and they are seeing renewable energy being at the forefront. We are seeing people planting forests again. So I think it's not all doom and gloom there, but we just need to be cautious with on-farm costs.
Yeah. Now, how about our high dollar against the US? Let's put your dealer's hat on for a minute. Which way do you think it's going to go?
Well, that's trickier. I mean, you'd have to say, all of the likelihood is it's going to go higher.
Commonly accepted around 86 cents, it might peak out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge here is to say, take a step back and say, well, what's driving the exchange rate? There's two fundamental factors. Primarily, it's a very weak US position. So you will have seen that job growth in the US has been very weak in the first quarter. They've been printing their own money to buy their own treasury bills. That can't last forever. Deficit is massive in the US. They're borrowing, I think, 4.6 billion a day.
And hot to China.
Yeah, they're in hot to China. So if they're not basically buying their own bonds, Chinese are buying them. And so I think what you've got is a lot of downward pressure on the US side of the ledger, if you like. Equally, New Zealand's actually doing quite well. If it wasn't for the earthquake, we'd be really booming along. And so, in many respects, I think it's a positive story for New Zealand, a very negative story for the US. Having said that, it's not all doom and gloom, and we import fertilisers and the like, we import petrol, we import diesel, so that actually does help our farmers. Indeed.
Now, can we just briefly talk about that interview with the BBC's Stephen Saka? He gave you a pretty hard time on our clean green image and claimed we're lying, I think was the word he used, about being 100% pure, when I think he said 90% of our rivers are polluted. Fair point, wasn't it?
No, look, I mean, they don't call it hard talk for nothing, so I guess that's part of the emphasis. But look, if you take it 100% pure, let's be realistic. I mean, firstly, it's a marketing tagline.
Sure.
By definition, cavemen, if they were wandering around New Zealand, would have done something to have an impact on the atmosphere. But are we relatively clean and green as a country, and can we live up to that tag? Well, I think we can. I think behind either Finland or Iceland, we now have the second cleanest waterways in the world. So yes, there's a big clean-up job to be done in certain parts, and this government's spending $250 million on that over the next 5 years. It's also the reason why we now have a national environmental standard, a national policy statement for water. But I think, if you put that to one side for a second, you get in a plane or you get in a car and you drive around New Zealand, well, I would defy people to tell me that this is the clean and green environment. I travel around Europe, I travel around Asia. I mean, yes, it's not perfect, but boy, it's pretty darn good. And I think in the context of a marketing line like 100% pure, actually, I think it stacks up. When we look at I'm Minister of Tourism, so when we look at the exit interviews, if you like, of people leaving New Zealand, and we ask them about whether they thought the environment lived up to their expectation, overwhelmingly the answer is yes.
Still, fertiliser and effluent discharge is still an issue for us. Just very briefly, are we doing enough?
Yeah, look, it is, but again, Fonterra's taking that very seriously, as our regional councils. And Fonterra's made it quite clear they're not going to pick up milk from farmers that don't observe the environmental responsibilities. We've put $15 million into a contestable fund to clean up our waterways alone, which is really about just making sure that they are fenced properly. I mean, we're spending, as I say, $250 million cleaning up Lake Rotoiti and Ellesmere and various other parts of the country. So we can do it better. We need to do it better because we do want to expand production. That's one of the reasons we're very supportive of irrigation schemes in New Zealand. But I actually think we can get that balance about right between our economic growth aspirations and our environmental responsibilities.
Okay, well look, thank you very much for your time today, Prime Minister.
Thanks a lot, John.
And I'm sure our farming audience would have found it very interesting indeed.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks a lot. Prime Minister John Key there, who found time in a very busy schedule to join us at our Field Days studio. Well, speaking of Field Days, next up, our correspondent Drew Chappell marks the 43rd National Field Days with a report on the event's humble beginnings and its growth to the huge undertaking it now is.
I think I might even get buried on the site, who knows, right? But yeah, no, it is. It's very important for me personally. In fact, it has developed me, this place. You know, I was a country boy, left school, went on the farm. But my horizons in life were extended when I became involved in this place.
Not too many events will induce strong emotions among Kiwi blokes, and even fewer will get farmers waxing lyrical. The Agricultural Field Days, however, an institution 43 years old, is one of those rarefied examples. The idea of a national farming exhibition was mooted back in 1966 when Nuffield scholar Sir John Kneebone wrote a letter to the then editor of the Waikato Times, Pat Cumming, saying,
"Would it not be possible with a little cooperation and coordination to have our famous Ruakura Farmers Week and our winter show coincide so that New Zealand farmers could have their annual outing in Hamilton, as they do in London at the Smithfield Show? New Zealand farmers from near and far could see Ruakura at its best, the winter show, the machinery and many of the attractions of the Waikato. A little imagination could make a really big affair of it."
To call Field Days a big affair would be an understatement now, but in 1969, when the first event was held, a relatively modest crowd of 15,000 people, mostly farmers and their families, were in attendance. The first two Field Days were based out of Hamilton at Te Rapa Racecourse. Doug Baldwin was involved on the organising committee right from day one and remembers the challenges of sharing a venue with the racing board.
In those early days at Te Rapa, it was a real nightmare because we had to actually facilitate the horse training the first thing in the morning. And so as soon as that was over, then the gang of us would move in and rip out all the rails and everything like that, and then have it during the day, and then last thing at night put all the rails back up again so that they could do their training next morning. And everything was, you know, the cooperation we got from the racing club was absolutely fantastic, and without it we could not have made it work. But once we got our own property, of course, we had just as much work because there was so much development to do, but it was a lot easier.
The royal family visited the event in 1970, which at the time boasted a budget of a little over $10,000 and consisted mainly of agricultural demonstrations. The Field Days quickly outgrew the size limitations of the racecourse, and by 1970 a committee was formed to find a suitable piece of land nearby to establish a permanent home for the event, and it didn't take them long to find one.
We appointed a committee to go out and source a hunk of land somewhere, and they looked at quite a few places, but most of them were too wet. I mean, we had to have something that we could work on in the middle of winter, and they found this place. And people see it today and say, yeah, oh, it's, that looks good and all that sort of thing. But in those days there were swamps, and it was a typical river bed strata, in the fact that there was gullies 10 or 15 feet deep. And behind me where the lake is, that went right through the middle of the property in raupo and swamp. And so over the years we had to change that whole look of it.
Despite the condition of the land at Mystery Creek, Doug Baldwin says there was never any trouble finding willing young farmers keen to help out with the organising and running of the days.
You never had any trouble getting volunteers. I mean, it was sort of one of the things that I guess there was quite a few of us that were sort of did a pretty good job of conning all our neighbours and mates, and so being in young farmers too, it was just a case of coordinating young farmers from all around the place and using them to our best advantage. And the same with federated farmers, they were really good.
One of those volunteers at the first Mystery Creek Field Days was Kerry Clarkin, whose love affair with the event began while he was a wide-eyed teenager 2 years before.
My first involvement as a volunteer was the first year that we came onto site here. I attended the first two Field Days at Te Rapa Racecourse, but I started volunteering when we started here. And oh look, you've got no idea the conditions compared to now. vehicles still do to get stuck when we get heavy rain, but vehicles used to get stuck all the time. It was horrendous parking cars in those days. It was not so much parking, it was getting them out again was the issue.
43 years on, and from those humble beginnings, the National Agricultural Field Days are now truly a farming institution. And not just in New Zealand either, the event regularly attracts visitors from an estimated 38 countries worldwide. The man in charge of putting it all together for the last 20 years is Barry Quayle. After a successful career in project management, Barry took over the organising committee in 1991 and immediately started to shake things up.
The event now is developed round about in size, about 3 times larger over those 20 years. In terms of other developments, we were at the time that I started, the infrastructure was starting to really, let's say, get to the end of its life and was creating a few problems. So the first few years of my involvement were more about getting that infrastructure right, the power, the water, all that side of things had to be put right because a growing event needs a good foundation.
Field Days has now grown into the country's largest annual event and attracts attention from all over the world. But Barry Quayle says there's always room for more growth.
Our aim is to make it even more important in terms of export and so on, and I've seen the sales directly from export here develop dramatically over the last 10 years. We're looking to make Field Days effectively a year-round event in terms of access through the internet, so you can buy and sell through the exhibitors year-round. So that's quite an interesting innovation, that Field Days is no longer just a 4-day event. Already the exhibitors tell us that the buying happens up to 6 months after the event from activity during the event.
From a budget of just 10 grand in 1969, Field Days is now worth more than $600 million to the New Zealand economy. Not bad for an event that only lasts 4 days a year. The key ideals that were set out by those Field Days pioneers still hold true, even in the 21st century business world. The proud display of Kiwi ingenuity and farming innovation to the rest of the world is still the driver of its enduring popularity.
It's all worked in with that philosophy, which hasn't changed from that day to this, of bringing town and country together, and also disseminating knowledge out to farmers again from all the latest research findings. So
yes.
It really hasn't changed.
And it's that philosophy that keeps people returning year after year, rain or shine, in the hundreds of thousands.
We call it Field Days fever, and we all suffer from it. I've suffered it from the day I started working here, right?
Welcome back. He's only been in the job 9 months, but the new CEO of AgResearch has some great plans for our largest agricultural research institution. I talk to Dr. Tom Richardson. Well, Tom Richardson, welcome to the Sector Report here on Country 99 TV. Now, you've been running AgResearch for about 9 months now after taking over from Andy West. Can you just give me a quick thumbnail sketch of your background and how you find yourself taking this route to being CEO?
Yes, well, certainly wasn't a route that I'd planned. My background is I come from Pennsylvania in the US. Right. Did a doctorate at Pennsylvania State University in plant genetics. All right. And in 1990 was fortunate enough to get what was then a Math Tech fellowship to come to New Zealand for what was supposed to be a 2-year stint. Was led out of Ruakura, based at Auckland University, and over the next 20 odd years made a series of decisions to stay in New Zealand, particularly because of the strength of the primary sector.
Right. And a good decision it was. How are you finding the job of running our biggest agricultural research establishment?
Well, like John, when I started the job, I said this is one of the best jobs in the country. If you're a scientist or science leader, to lead the country's largest research institute in a sector at this stage, when the CRI reforms are changing the way we work, when the sector's thinking different about innovation, it's a pivotal role. And so I've really been enjoying my first 9 months.
You don't have that sinking feeling, I've got a tiger by the tail here.
We knew we had a big change program to put underway.
Right.
So we have a lot of tigers by the tail,
right.
but at least we have a backdrop now around the Crown's expectation for CRIs, what the end users expect of us, and what our staff have signed up to do that makes grappling with those tigers manageable.
Indeed. Ag research is all about innovation. There have been, or there still are underway, Crown Research Institute reforms, yes. CRI reforms. How have these reforms taken shape, and how have they affected the way you go about your research?
Yes. In terms of their taking shape, when the new government came in, they established a CRI task force, chaired by Neville Jordan, and out of that task force came the CRI reforms.
Right.
I guess a couple of the really key points, John, in terms of the way we now seek to make a difference for New Zealand, it's reaffirmed that the CRIs are about making a difference, in our case, on farm.
Yeah.
And so the government is more and more likely to measure us by what we contribute out there,
right.
rather than the dividends we produce at ag research.
Yeah.
We need to be financially viable to be relevant to anyone, but our focus really now is on partnering with our sector to create a difference in the real economy.
So you're not a bunch of scientists and white coats living in a sort of detached world. You're obviously very hands-on. Are you pretty heavily involved in the government's primary growth partnerships program, the PGPs?
Yes, we're heavily involved. The primary growth partnership is one of the largest research investments New Zealand has made. It's a partnership model where the government funds about 50% of the work and the private sector funds the other 50%. Ag Research, as a Crown Research Institute, can't be the direct recipient of those PGB programs, but we contribute to many of them, right, and help co-develop a lot of them.
Now, earlier this year, Sector Report called on your people in white coats at your research establishment at Invermay in Otago, and we were very impressed by what we saw. The area that really made my head hurt, I must say, was genomics.
Right.
Can you give our viewers a rough summary of what genomics is, because it does seem to be the new direction for agriculture?
Well, it is, and in fact you landed on one of the world's best teams in animal genomics at Invermay. And so genomics really is the science of understanding the DNA and using that information in our application to be better and better at selecting animals or plants for the traits that we wish to enhance. Right. So it's similar to the Human Genome Project, but applied to plants and animals is our ambit.
Yeah. Can you give me some examples of the work you're doing with both plants and animals?
Sure. Well, starting with the animals, again, come back to that Invermay group. We're leaders in sheep genetics, for example. So they're using those genomic tools now to understand the particular DNA sequences that might relate to new traits. And in that area, I guess the fastest moving area is looking at what traits. So in addition to moving from traits like reproduction, we're now looking at carcass merit traits, for example. So using really advanced scanning technology to try to relate, if you can imagine this, a DNA molecule to the eating quality of a cut of sheep or beef.
No wonder my head hurt when I was trying to understand all that. Now, just getting on to global warming briefly, after the disaster that was the Copenhagen summit, there was one good news story that emerged, and we were at the centre of it, and that was New Zealand's role in getting a whole raft of countries to sign up to the Global Research Alliance into Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. Quite a mouthful, that.
Yes.
It's a pretty big deal for New Zealand. How is it actually working at a practical level, though?
Well, as you mentioned, the first meeting was held recently. The New Zealand government has committed $45 million over 4 years, and they're now identifying the key targets to focus on. I guess from a New Zealand perspective, given New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions are heavily driven by our primary sector, our animals,
Indeed.
You won't be surprised to learn that our foci tend to be around understanding animal methane production. And that actually starts in the gut. So we could spin your head next time you want to visit us around some genomics inside the gut of animals. We're actually sequencing 1,000 microorganisms from within the gut.
I was going to say it would be the bacteria.
That's right, in the rumen. So understanding those DNA sequences might help us identify animals that are less likely to produce high levels of methane. But methane production is also an energy leak from productivity. So it's, in addition to greenhouse gas mitigation, if we can better understand the biology and the genetics of the rumen, we might also be able to enhance productivity, which is the focus of these field days.
Is Ag Research doing much work in the area of runoff from farms?
Yes, we do quite a lot of work, and particularly in collaboration with other Crown Research Institutes and universities. I guess our specialization in that area is understanding the farming context. So rain actually falls on real paddocks across a lot of this country, which have different grazing schedules, different forage covers over the year. They need to be economically sustainable as well as environmental. So I guess our particular contribution to many of these studies is to understand the farming context as we develop methodologies to measure and then ultimately mitigate farm runoffs, but also non-water related issues like nitrogen and phosphorus.
Yeah, so that's quite a biggie, not only for you but for us as a country.
It's really a biggie for us as a country, and it's an area where essentially all of the universities and all the Crown Research Institutes have collaborations to address the issues that matter for New Zealand.
Well, fascinating stuff, and it sounds like ag-research is in very good heart. Thanks very much for giving us your time here at Fieldays, Tom.
It's a pleasure, John.
Ag-Research CEO Tom Richardson there. Well, that's our show for this week, but we'll be back very soon with a major investigation into our most precious resource, water, and how our farmers use it. And remember, you can catch up with Tower Sector Report on our website. Catch you next time.